Welcome back. I'm Ann Myrie and we are continuing our work on the Nouveau quilt. By now you've had time to build your peacock. The body and the feathers are all done and assembled, and you have your quilted background. So what you have here will turn into what we have here. Now the instructions for this are written out step by step, but we wanted to just give you a few highlights. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to want to realize is that when we place the peacock, we are not going to mark the background. We're going to eye this up because he's an organic shape, he's an animal. We don't really have to mark where this is going to go. You know, we're going to center the feathers on, making sure that we've got at least 1/4 of an inch on the bottom and then 1/4 of an inch on the top, so that he doesn't get caught up in the seams. And for the scrolls, the fence on either side of him, we will be marking that. But let's start by working on our peacock. So the first thing that you want to do is place your feathers down, and again, just eye it up and make sure it's centered. So you've got, you know, all of your pieces are sort of close to being the same distance between the tips and the seams here. What you do want to do is place the body, just set him in the center to make sure that you don't have any gaps on either side of him. And then once you're sure of that, pin or glue your feathers in place just at the tips here and remove the body, because we need to work on the feathers first, the background. So the first thing that you want to do is zigzag the outside all the way around. You can start here and work all the way up. I used an invisible thread here and I just did a zigzag. You could do an applique stitch as well, whatever you're comfortable with. Don't stitch in the seams between the feathers just yet, because as you've noticed, we've got some yarns here that we're going to be using to bling him up a little bit. So we're gonna couch this gold yarn in between each feather. So once you have your feathers stitched on, the next thing you're going to do is couch, find a yarn. This is just a worsted weight yarn that's got some sparkle and it kind of lays flat. A ribbon yarn looks really good here too. And you're just going to lay it in place. I didn't glue it or pin it or anything. I just used a gold thread and I zigzagged that. I extended that 1 inch past each feather so that I could go ahead and fuse these protruding teardrop shapes onto the end of each couched yarn. So once you have all of the peacock feathers on and the couched yarns on, you're going to take each shape that you have and you're going to fuse it onto the end of each couched stem, I guess we'll call it. And then we need to stitch those on. But to do that, what I did, just to make it a little bit more textured, is I used this eyelash yarn, and eyelash comes in all colors, shapes, and sizes. And I just laid that along each teardrop, just along the seam line of the teardrop. And I used the same color yarn, the same color thread as the yarn, and I just zigzagged, making sure I caught the base of the yarn and the base of the applique. So I just used a normal zigzag stitch for that, and I did that around each shape just to make sure that those fused pieces are going to stay in place. And you'll notice that each of the wishbone shapes on here have an outline, so I used free motion to outline those. Inside in the applique pieces, the reverse applique, I worked a little bit of stitching, and then I felt like it was a little stark, so I added just a little bit of gold textile paint there just to bring in some shadow. And as you can see, I hand stitched a bead to each one. This is one of the reasons that I like to quilt background first, because of course you can add anything you want to and then the quilting won't get in the way. The quilting's already done. Once you have all of this background of him done, you can go ahead and place the body. So what I did was I put him where he went, making sure again that you're eyeing this up and you're leaving that space there for the seam. I started stitching him here, and I just stitched each seam. I did an applique stitch matching the thread to the fabric. Of course, you could do any thread color you wanted to. And I stitched each individual piece, and then I left this ruffle free so that I could hand stitch this yarn in. So this yarn is just an eyelash yarn, looks like this, and I just cut this section off, the fun section, and I just dabbed some glue in here and I popped that in just to keep it in place, and then I hand stitched it in place. Same here, I couched some sparkly little lines up here, and then I added this little headdress, I call it, for the top of his head. And this is what is called a ruffle yarn. It looks just like this. So if you went into any yarn store or chain store, you could ask for the ruffle yarn, and that is what this yarn looks like. And when you hand stitch it in place, you'll gather it at the bottom, and very easily and without hardly any effort, it makes this great little ruffled headdress. So for the face, I chose an Aboriginal fabric that I really loved. It was very graphic. I thought these kind of look like eyelashes, so I used that. You could also find a polka dot fabric that's got you know, just a little eye. You could fuse that right in place, and just make sure that you're stitching on top of everything that you're fusing, because eventually that fuse it could fall off. So I just added some hand stitching here. I did machine stitch it, but I didn't want to machine stitch too much, so I added hand stitching just to accentuate like the opening of his beak there, and then just added some beads along here, and pretty much called him done. Okay, so now that you have your peacock all placed, we're going to go ahead and work on the scrolling fence on the sides. So just for ease of showing you that, I'm going to remove this so we could just focus on the side. Go ahead and take your printed pattern and cut it out along the vertical lines. The length is going to be the exact same size as your paper, 11 inches. You're going to take a piece of freezer paper and cut it the exact same size, and you're going to trace all of the lines that you see with the Sharpie. Okay? That freezer paper, oh, that's paper side up this time, paper side up. That way you can just place this right over on your scroll. Now these instructions are written out step by step, but these are just the highlights once again. And you're going to press this in place. When you stitch on these lines, you're going to have the placement for your scroll. So what you want to do is set your machine up for basting. I did a 4.5 stitch length, and I used a very dark thread. I stitched every single line. I extended the lines all the way up and down to the edge of the piece, and then I spent just a little bit of time ripping the freezer paper away. Once I did that, this is what I ended up with. So it's a very busy background, and it's hard to see probably on camera, but when you look, when you have yours in front of you, you'll be able to see the lines really well. Let's just focus on this one here. So bias binding can either be made or purchased. The first time I did the quilt, I made the bias binding. The second time, I purchased this one. For more on bias binding techniques, you can visit Jill Finley's show or Amy McClellan's show. But here is a little demonstration of how to work the purchased binding. You're going to just pop dabs of glue. Stay away from the intersections, because some of the lines lay over and some of the lines lay under, and how you're going to find that is back to this pattern. The dark lines are the lines that will lay over. Okay, so just refer to your pattern. So when you have your purchase binding, make sure that you are using it where the seam is under, so you can't see. If you do it upside down, you're going to be able to see that fold right there. So just keep that in mind as you're going. And you're going to place dabs of glue every 1.5 inches. And this glue dries really quickly, so you're just going to hold it in place for a couple seconds, and then you're going to move on. Once you get all the way around, you're going to notice that you're going to get into some tighter curves here. That glue needs to be placed every ½ inch or so. And then you just hold it in place for a couple seconds, maybe 20 seconds or so, and then just continue on until the end. And once you get to the end, you just clip it at an angle. You can either hand stitch this in place or you can machine stitch it. Either way you decide to stitch this down, you can stitch over those short ends so the raw edges won't matter. Those will be included in the stitching. So when you have your bias binding attached, and here's an intersection, let's just say, when you go to stitch this, especially on machine stitching, you'll stop the stitching right here. You're not going to cross over. You can knot it and then start again here, knot it, and then you'll clip that thread right there. You're not going to keep stitching there. That's what keeps this looking really fresh and crisp. It gets too gummed up in here if you do too much stitching. So just whatever one is going over, you can stitch all the way across, but whichever one is under, you do have to stop at that little bridge there. So now you have the peacock and the scrolling gate all done and stitched out. Section 1 is complete. This can be a standalone art piece where you could bind it. You can make a pillow out of it. You could do all kinds of different things with it. Or join us next time and we're going to make the butterfly blocks and the beady blocks, and we'll join that to section 1. Thank you so much.